Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage podcast with Greg Gregory. Join us as Greg interviews powerful thought leaders and successful team and leadership experts from across the country on teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Now let's check in for this week's episode.
Welcome back to the Teamwork Advantage. We're the podcast that helps you grow your businesses, your teams, your organizations, your softball teams, your church teams, your synagogue teams. We help people build and develop better teams in three key areas: teamwork, leadership, and culture. My name is Greg Gregory, and welcome back. If you're new to the podcast, I'll let you know we've been downloaded in over 75 countries. We are going global. We've got a lot of folks. We've got go back and find some of our archives interviews. We've got some amazing people. And we bring some experts in specific fields of their own industries with ideas that you can use and then extrapolate those ideas so you can help your teams grow and develop. That's what it's all about. The next 45 minutes, we're going to be having a nice chat today with Brandon McKee. He's the CEO. That's sometimes referred to as the Chief Everything Officer. And I know sometimes that is exactly how people feel. But he's the CEO of Big Media. And his primary role right now at Big Media is to plan, direct, coordinate, and oversee operations within the organization. So anybody who's in organization operations, you know how hard that can be sometimes when you got a team of 2, 3, or a team of 30. He works to ensure that the development, the implementation, the efficient operations, as well as cost effective, meet the current and future needs of the organization of Big. Prior to joining the rapidly expanding Big Media team, Brandon was involved in various roles in the fitness industry. We were talking, he was into martial arts, getting into that, which I found fascinating. He has a senior professional in human resources certification from HRCI and is a strategic planning guru. That's one of my favorite words, Brandon. Guru. All right. He grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, currently lives in Arlington, Virginia. You can find him at the dog park with Bruno, and I want to find out all about Bruno as well as his partner, Paul. So, Brandon, welcome, absolutely welcome to the Teamwork Advantage.
Thank you for having me, Greg. I'm excited.
You know, we like to have fun around this and say that we're about having fun, and it works in all businesses and all walks of life. And I really do believe that, and I think you're going to be able to show some evidence to that today, coming from a background in fitness and everything else. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your history? And you didn't wake up one day, say you're going to do this and get involved in this, and technology's changing every day, and you know, COVID put us on another spinning direction. So kind of walk us through from the beginning how you got into where you are now.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, you know, first and foremost, I definitely didn't wake up and think I would be the CEO of a marketing company one day, Greg. But, you know, where I started actually was in the martial arts industry. You know, I was doing it's an art called Muay Thai, and my traditional discipline was in Taekwondo, which is probably more well-known in the United States is the Taekwondo side of things, but, you know, was getting into national tournaments, competing. You know, I woke up one day and decided that that really wasn't a career path long-term for me. I had to get a job, I had to produce income, and that wasn't cutting it for me. And so I got into the fitness industry, and I started, you know, from the bottom really, working at the front desk, and then kind of worked my way up into management, you know, multi-club management, you know, clubs as big as 100,000 square feet, you know, with multi-million-dollar revenues. And, you know, really, I think you mentioned COVID and the pandemic. That's kind of where I hit a turning point, is that I've always been really passionate about my teams and the people that I work with. And, you know, in that middle management setup, I wasn't making enough impact, you know, to make a difference in that company. It was just a little bit too large. And that's really where I started looking. You know, I wanted to work for a company that I could really, you know, create an impact in the organization, not just financially, but really, you know, culture wide, and work with the human resources teams to make sure that people weren't just proud of, you know, the profits that their company was putting out. They were proud of working for Big Media. So that's where, you know, I landed at Big, and then similar story, just kind of worked my way up from there and took over the company pretty recently.
So you got your SPHR for human resources. That's kind of different to go from a human resource side to an operations side.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, because I know we got a lot of listeners on here that are in human resources, and several of our folks on here gotten into human resources by accident. They were supposed to go down a legal path or some other form. So tell us, you kind of went the other way. You're in human resources, and now you're up this side. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's a fun story, and ultimately, one of my good friends was working in human resources, and she was working with a lot of the managers of my previous company in that fitness world. And so, one of the biggest traits we found as we hung out, talked a little bit, is that these managers, although they might have been great salespeople, they might have been great at producing revenue, they didn't understand how their teams ticked. They didn't understand how to drive accountability in the proper way. They didn't understand how to, performance manage someone in the proper way. And so ultimately, that's what got me interested in human resources and, doing things the right way. I think, your listeners in human resources will probably appreciate this, but there's certainly a wrong way to manage and a right way, in my opinion. And I think the more understanding you have of the human resources background, the better you're ultimately going to be as a leader.
Oh, yes. There's no doubt about that. We got to understand, I can still remember the challenges I had in management, the first person that I had to fire.
Yep.
And that was actually an interesting situation because he was double dipping us as a salesperson. And I had to make sure it was correct. So I called our HR team. I made sure that I went through it the exact way that you're supposed to because I had not done it. I want to make sure it was done correctly. And that's really key that managers have to understand. Building your team. In the book, Good to Great, we always talk about get the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats, get the wrong ones off. Yep. When I had to get somebody off the bus, I had to do it the right way. And that's a key factor.
Right. I love Jim Collins, by the way. And yeah, I always phrase it like this, is that when you're going into a termination conversation or frankly, any type of performance management conversation, the person across the desk from you or across the Zoom from you shouldn't be surprised, right? You should have gone through a process. They should know what's happening. Yeah, they should know what's coming, right? And so, these horror stories you hear of, just terminating someone at the onset, not doing due diligence, not going through a process, it just, it bothered me to see. And that's why I, kind of devoted a lot of my time to getting better at that and making sure I could teach that.
So, because when you're terminating somebody or when you're dealing with performance management, that impacts the team. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And then, of course, the pandemic brought on all kinds of things. So let's kind of get into where you are right now, big media. When you're talking about win big, we were talking earlier, when you first came on board, you had a couple of offices, I believe.
Right.
And now you're 100% remote.
That's correct. Yep, okay. 100%. So
tell us a little bit about how that process went. And you're not exactly a large organization. You don't have thousands of employees.
Right.
So it's probably a little easier because of your dynamic size.
Yeah.
But tell us how you went through that, how the decision was made, how people work. Tell us about your kind of model being, it's remote, we know that, but tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, within my first couple of weeks, I think we were talking about is really when me and the former CEO and now chairman made the decision that we were going to be fully remote. And a big reason why is because, it was probably mid-pandemic. We had some folks that weren't necessarily comfortable coming in. We had done an analysis on productivity, and there wasn't a huge decrease in productivity at that time at all. The other big indicator and something I noticed just based on the labor market, and in some instances, you're still seeing that even though there's been some shifts, is talent. We figured out that we could get really talented people, but they just might live in Colorado or they might be in New York. And so, my big push on that, and I think you're seeing this across a couple different industries, as long as the organization can run remotely, is that, yeah, they might not be right next to you in your office, and you might not be able to knock on their door, but they are talented individuals that want to work. And ultimately, they're probably going to be more productive than the individuals that you might have previously had in that role, right? So
it opens up your talent pool, definitely.
100%. Yep. And I have a funny story about that too. We were struggling to fill a designer role, and we were just really internally trying to figure that out, because across the board, we'd never had any problems with hiring. We never had any problems with, getting resumes, and maybe we had 4 or 5. And the second we put, and it was a remote role, by the way, we just hadn't advertised it as such. The second we put 100% work remote on that advertisement, hundreds of resumes came in, right? So It's really about, you have to follow the market sometimes and understand what people need. I think it's too often what's in it for me when it comes from the businesses. And I think too often we forget we work for our employees as well. So making decisions that benefit them is super important.
Great. Southwest Airlines, of course, has always used the expression in the early days, I should say. I'm not sure how they're running today, but it was always the mindset of our number one customer is not our customer. Our number one customer is our employee. If we take care of our employees will customer.
100%.
That's 100% true. When you went remote, what was the biggest challenge you had in keeping the teamwork and the culture strong?
Yeah, I think it all came down to, communication was a big thing. And not the communication you think. We still had our normal, meetings. We still had our heads up meeting on Mondays, right? But that nuance of, I have to book a 30-minute time frame on Brandon's calendar to walk through this problem. That really it definitely created some challenges for us for a while. We were running into situations that we hadn't run into before, and it's just because someone hadn't picked up their phone. And really the way I looked at it is I didn't pick up my phone. And so now what we do, and really it's more of a culture connecting with your team basis, is that we take a couple minutes at the top of every call, and I work this into our calendar, by the way. I know how in the industry sometimes it's, hey, if it needs to be a 30-minute meeting, it's a 30-minute meeting. If it needs to be a 17-minute meeting, it's a 17-minute meeting. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I like to build in a little bit of buffer time for our team to just connect as humans. Ultimately, we still need that human connection. That's what's been lost a little bit in the, across the board from people going remote. So, I want time for, Leslie to talk to me about her cats. I want time for my team to tell me what they did over the weekend, and we connect on that. You'd be surprised how much that affects a team. And we've even gotten, we do a lot of surveys at Win Big. We try to make sure we really understand how our engagement is going. And that's the word I like to use, is how are we engaging with our team? How are they engaging with us? And those scores just went up and up and up as we increased the communication, but not on the business side of things, on the personal side of things. Okay. Another great example is we started something called Coffee and Conversations, which is a meeting that has nothing to do about work, and it has everything to do about just connecting with each other and sharing a cup of coffee or tea, and just talking things out.
I absolutely love that. Making a note on Coffee and Conversations.
Yeah.
That's really key. Because the biggest thing that most people have told me over the last 3 years, the biggest thing that they miss in the office environment is, and they use the term, the water cooler conversation. And That's exactly what it is. Keeping the culture up, getting the conversations. In Win Big, do you guys have any employees who are like, I'm here to work, I'm not here to socialize mindsets?
Sure.
Okay, you do. So let me ask you, I want to know about that, but then I want to know, how do you combat that to get them involved with your Coffee and Conversations mindset?
Yeah, well, one thing, and yes and no. I think the way we hire and the way we onboard really helps ingratiate someone into our culture and helps them understand, hey, we're not just here to, build profits for the company. We're here to connect with each other as well and make this a fun and safe environment for people to work in. So everyone really emulates that. But there are certain people that, they do like to, sit behind their desk, and they signed up for a remote role for a reason. I think one of the ways, just to circle back to what I was talking about, is, that Coffee and Conversations. But one thing I do as a leader, aside from that, is I do random phone calls every day to somebody on my team. Like you mentioned, we're not the biggest team in the world. And so quite often my team is hearing from me, and I'm never calling to ask about a client. I'm not calling to ask about, what's this number on this spreadsheet. I'm calling to see how they're doing. I'm calling to, do a mental health check. I'm calling to make sure that everything in their week is shaping up like they thought it would, and to offer coaching if it's not. I think something we miss, and every employee likes this. I don't care if they're, on the more reserve side, or if they're, a big personality within the organization. Everyone wants to be coached. And that's what I hear a lot in the You hear it a lot in the financial sector where they're trying to bring people back into the offices because they need to be coached, because they want to be mentored. I don't necessarily think you have to be in an office to have that happen. I just think you have to have engaged managers that are proactively reaching out, because it's not always on the employee, it's on us to make sure that we're connecting with our teams.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way street, there's no doubt.
Sure.
You said you make random phone calls.
Yeah.
Is that a pick up the phone the old-fashioned way, or is that jumping on a quick Zoom just out of the blue?
So it's more the latter. It's a little bit of both, actually. A lot of times I'll be driving home. I still go into an office setting. It works really well for me, at least 2 to 3 times a week. I'm by myself there too, but I like to go somewhere, and I usually do it on my way home. I'm driving
I have
home.
a friend of mine who does that. He calls it his third space.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to
Exactly.
get from your house and your office to the home, and go to a third space.
That's exactly what I like. My husband works in an office 4 days a week now, and just me sitting in my house all day wasn't working for me. So I found
their third place is Starbucks, by the way.
Oh, I'm a avid Starbucks goer too every morning. Yeah, so I do it on the way home a lot of times. And so I'll just pick up my phone and, buzz someone random. Sometimes I have a little insight into maybe it was a tougher day for a specific person, and maybe I, put my attention that way. But a lot of times it's just random, checking on someone, seeing how things are going. If it's a Friday, asking them what they, got planned for the weekend, anything exciting coming up. If it's a Monday, asking how their weekend was. I try to keep those conversations pretty short, because I don't want to take up valuable time from that person. And it's typically the end of the day, so I don't want them to feel like they got to stay on the phone with me for the next hour. But they're short, they're, not work related most of the time, unless the employee brings that up, and then we can work through a challenge together. You'd be surprised how much feedback I get about those conversations. And a lot of times you do uncover challenges. You do uncover things that maybe were on someone's mind, but they were never going to mention it unless the opportunity surfaced. So that's some of the wins I've seen. Yeah.
One of the things what you're describing in my picture comes up, you are opening up lines of communication better, which creates more vulnerability between you and them as well. And
Right.
by you showing your vulnerability, then they feel more comfortable in opening up, and they show more vulnerability themselves, and that creates the symbiotic culture that you're looking at.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
I think we were talking about earlier in regards to just everything going on in the labor market and the economy. And, leaders need to show optimism. They need to show that they have a plan. I'm big on transparency in leadership. And if you, kind of keeping everything to your chest and you're not engaging with your team, I have this phrase, but people start to make stuff up if you're not being transparent with them. They start to make assumptions. They start to, maybe think negative thoughts. So it's your job to make sure that you're constantly communicating the why behind something and being optimistic, frankly.
All right, I want everybody to make sure we go back and pick up what you just said, because what you just said is really, really key. Pick up the why behind something.
Yep.
Simon Sinek, of course, does a great book called It Starts With Why.
Starts with why, yep.
Okay, and we got to understand, employees need to know why. As a leader, when you start sharing those why ideas with them, then they're more likely to figure out a how, either on their own, or they'll be more proactive in working to figure out a how.
Right.
That's really, really key. So Win Big is all about some artificial intelligence and target marketing, and I get that.
Yep.
What have you seen in your industry? Because you can't speak to every industry, although a lot of your clients are in multiple industries.
Right.
What have you seen in a marketplace today that's been a challenge for you and your team specifically?
Yeah, great question. And it's more recent in nature. We've started to see this build up a little bit. A lot of it has to do with the economy and the fear of, needing to reel back spending or spend our money in other areas of the business. You see a lot of the media headlines right now, and, all these big tech companies are laying people off, right? So what that tends to do to the market, and any business really, but specific industries as well, as they start to reel back on their marketing spend. And our challenge as a team, and we talk about this regularly, weekly at least, is education. It doesn't have to do with, being a better target marketer. It doesn't have to do with having a better creative. It's got to do with educating as the why, right? So for example, I had a conversation with a client the other day that if their competitors are now reeling back on their advertising spend, that makes the advertisements cheaper for them. And if they double down at this moment, instead of reel back their spend, they'll capture more of that market share. So those are the conversations, not just myself, and really it's my team that has to have those conversations, and they're really good at this. Is just educating, our clients and our potential clients to how they should position themselves in this market. We did this in COVID as well. People, things started happening in COVID, things started shutting down, and people went, they turned off the faucet in terms of marketing. And I'm not saying you shouldn't market smarter in times like this, but you certainly shouldn't stop marketing, is typically where I come from there. And
I'm kind of on the same boat there. People stopped training, stopped bringing, doing certain types of training concepts. And as well as I do, that training, like coaching, it needs to be an ongoing process.
Right.
It needs to absolutely be more focused and ongoing. What have you seen with some of your clients in that same area? What have you seen them doing as far as the challenge with their teams? What are they noticing?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are lacking we talked about transparency earlier, and I have the benefit to talk to a lot of our clients and their senior leadership teams. And recently we were having a conversation about the challenges that are coming. They're in the entertainment business, and their business probably will take a slight hit right now as consumers are spending a little less money. And a lot of what it comes down to is the transparency and the lack of understanding from their teams as to what's going on and what the plan is. So back to Simon Sinek, right? Why? You have to, we talk about headwinds, right? You have to accept those headwinds. You have to talk to your teams about them. The first thing I did when these headlines started coming out and when these, financial reports about losses started coming out is I gathered my team and we had a conversation about it. I said, look, this is happening. Some of our clients are going to be affected by this, and here's what we can say and do to help them through this. And I have those same conversations with our clients. It's not about ignoring the elephant in the room. It's about tackling it, helping your team understand what could happen and why you don't think that's going to happen because you have a plan. I think sometimes people don't have that conversation because maybe they don't have a plan yet. Which is okay, but you got to figure it out pretty quick, and you got to share that message with your team and be very transparent.
And that's key. Again, you're bringing up the why and the transparency and keeping things engaged. When you start to look at it, I want to ask the challenge question again.
Sure.
What's your biggest challenge right now that you are coping and dealing with your teams?
With my teams, it's probably that optimism, as we were talking about, is that we have to wake up every day and really make sure that education and communication is on the forefront of every conversation we have. It's not about, our data works. It's our advertisements work. It's about communicating to the clients what it is that they need to be doing during this time, what the data shows, by the way, because we're, the way we operate is we're very data driven. We're not guessing, you hear a lot of guessing in marketing. And so that's what my team's probably biggest struggle is making sure that that's on the forefront of every conversation. And if it's not, that's when we start to see reelbacks. That's when we start to see, a client drop, right? So that communication, and it has to come from everybody, from the creative team, from the account team to the senior executive team.
So how are you working on that? What are you doing in your role? What are you getting your other managers to do to try and keep the optimism engaged?
Yeah, I'm a big
in a new world we are in today, remote, in-person, hybrid, Sometimes those hybrids are who knows what. Could be the same 3 days a week, could be 2 days here, 4 days there, everybody doing different things. How do you keep that optimism going?
Yeah. I'm a big believer, Greg, in role play, and in the sense that, you walk through situations with your team, maybe as the opposing party, and you kind of engage them and challenge them to have that conversation with you. If I'm the business owner and I'm asking you a bunch of questions about why I should be spending here, why are we doing this? Why does that creative look like this? We better have answers. And it's not on my team to just have that on the tip of their tongue. It's my job as the leader to make sure that I'm coaching, right? And making sure that they're prepared for those conversations. So typically what we do, to answer your question, is, every week we have, we call it a heads up meeting, but it's not as much about what it is that we're doing in a week, because we have systems and processes so everyone knows what we're doing. It's about walking through what we're hearing from the clients and doing some role play in front of the whole team so they can see exactly how I'm having that conversation. To double back to my fitness industry experience, that's what we did all the time. You have an objection here from a sales perspective. How are you going to overcome that? Well, they're not just going to figure it out on their own. You have to coach and teach.
You build a library of responses.
Exactly.
You got to have your knowledge library, regardless of the business that you're in. I know a lot of information help desks, they have their knowledge library. When the customer says they have this problem, they get into the keywords in, find it, and get the response of what they're supposed to do with it. And the better that library is, the better it works. The same
thing. Exactly. And, I know you mentioned earlier about, some of the audience in that human resources role, they'll appreciate this as well as the L&D side of things, right? Learning and development, making sure that you have processes as a company. That's something I put a lot of my attention to with our head of HR is, do we have training programs in place for a new employee that might be coming in as a manager? Just because they're coming in with a VP level, title and or a director level title doesn't mean they manage the same way we do. Doesn't mean they understand our expectations. So how does your onboarding look? How does your continuing education look within your company? And are you investing into that as an organization?
Yeah. Onboarding is so critical today because there's so many people that are having people on their teams and they're going into the office and they've never met the people face to face.
Yeah.
And so getting them onboarded, getting them ingrained, I guess is the word, with the culture within your organization is absolutely key. So Brandon, when we stop to think about it, what are one or two little tricks, tips that you would give a leader today who's bringing onboarding somebody new into their team? Beyond just the HR part of the traditional corporate onboarding, which is very critical. But is there anything you would advise a manager to do when somebody new is coming onto their team?
Yeah, I can think of two things right off the bat. And you mentioned one of them just in passing when we were chatting, Greg, is that, they shouldn't just meet the people on their team. They shouldn't just be talking to their direct reports and, you, right? One thing we do at Win Big is, and it makes our onboarding process a little bit longer, a little bit more complex, but I really believe in it, is that you meet everyone. Because we are a 100% remote company. If you think about it, when you go into an office for the first time, you might be meeting your team, but you're still walking past, Susie's desk and, Brad's desk, and you're saying hi, and maybe you're, sharing a story or two. So it's mandatory at Win Big that a new employee meet everyone. That may change one day. If we have 1,000 employees, that might not be as possible, but right now, because, I really believe in the culture that we've set, everyone meets everyone. You understand what Leslie does, you understand what Andrew does, and you have a really good understanding of our culture by the end of all those conversations. And the other exciting thing is, if I'm doing my job right, the people on those conversations with that new employee are just adding a little bit of culture every conversation. They're confirming to that employee that their decision was right, because we're all kind of speaking the same language. So that would be one thing we do. Ultimately, I think the other is making sure that we have a really foolproof system in terms of what they should expect in the first 30, 60, 90 days. A lot of companies that I've seen miss that is that, it's your onboarding is 7 business days and then you're kind of off to the races. And it's, every man for himself, every woman for themselves. And, what we really believe in is very intentional. This is even after the intros, right? You have a 30-day set of goals and expectations. You have a 60-day set of goals and expectations, and so on and so forth. And you have check-ins with myself, you have check-ins with the human resources team. And, some people go, well, duh, but that actually is very rare in my experience.
They go duh because they think you should do it. They think everybody does it, but nobody does it. So it needs to be scheduled and planned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So having a really good 30, 60, 90-day plan, every time I've ever done that with an employee, they've seen really good results. And, on the other side of it, we were talking about performance management. You can figure out what those bad habits are maybe really quickly because you're going back and you're coaching and you're talking about it. We set an expectation, maybe we wouldn't get there. Why? Is it because we didn't set them up for success, or is it because, there's something missing there that we really need to address early on?
Right.
I hear this phrase of, fire fast sometimes. And, I think there is a misconception with that, in the fact that I think you have to do everything in your power to make sure that you give your employees the resources to be successful. And then if you're doing that and someone's not hitting the mark, I do believe that you should move quickly and make sure, in a compassionate way for both parties, that if it's not the best fit, you have that conversation. But you need to have a process in place to make sure that it's a fair shot.
The old expression is, if you just let it fester, it's not going to go away.
Exactly.
Talk to me a little bit about your heads up meetings. You do them, every Monday?
Every Monday.
How long do they last?
Just about 30 minutes most of the time.
Okay. A lot of organizations do something like that, whether it's a huddle meeting on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or whatever.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what goes into a heads up meeting for you guys.
Sure. I mentioned earlier, as a leader in a remote organization, I tend to build in buffer time to every one of my meetings. If I have 15, 20 minutes of content, it's a 30-minute meeting because I want to make sure the team has a chance to be humans and connect with each other, talk about what exciting things we did over the weekend. We have people in Colorado with a bunch of snow and they get to ski, right? So talking about that a little bit, right?
Okay.
So that's probably the first 5 to 6 minutes. And then I really subscribe, and I recommend this, by the way, to everyone listening, is the one thing. We really subscribe to the one thing as an organization, and that's a whole separate organization out there. They've written a great book called The One Thing. And Gary Keller's involved in that, the founder and chairman of Keller Williams. And what they talk about in that book, the principle is that there needs to be a very specific focus for every day, every week, every month. That doesn't mean you don't have multiple priorities, by the way. It just means that there's probably one thing that, if we can accomplish that and we can move that initiative forward, is going to help our organization grow. So we talk about that. I go through every single member of our team and I ask them what their one thing is. And we've gotten really good at, when we first started, it was like, well, I got like 4 one things, Brandon. And I'm like, well, no, we got one thing. What's your one thing, right? Maybe that's to, on the design side, they're building a portfolio of designs for, one of our larger clients. And, they're really excited to get feedback about it. I want to hear about what their one thing is.
Okay. Because that keeps them engaged at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and I assume at some point, either in a weekly heads up, or if you do it once a month somewhere in there, you're doing some recognitions and things like that along the way as well. Because it's not just, this is what we are doing today. It's not that kind of thing.
Not at all. We actually have something called Wow Shares at Win Big Media. And it's really meant to be like, wow, that was amazing. I can't believe that we accomplished that last week. Or, maybe it's to a specific person. So a lot of times we go around the room and, and everyone kind of knows this already. So it's top of mind on Mondays, but someone will raise their hand and say, hey, Brandon, I have a wow share. Last week we had a conversation with a client and Dan just crushed it. He did a great job explaining the why behind this advertising strategy, and the client's extremely excited and happy. And we celebrate that. I think to celebrate the little wins along with the big wins, it's really important on a weekly and daily basis.
I wanted to get involved with the heads up because there's a lot of organizations who in person were doing something like the heads up, again, whether it was a huddle meeting or what they wanted to call it.
Yeah.
But when they went remote, they kind of stopped. And I wonder, you still do it, and I think that's really, really key when you look at that. We've talked about the leaders a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We've touched on the culture a little bit. What's one thing, if you're advising, if you're coaching a college kid coming into business today, okay, what's the one thing you might share with him or her to get them to understand how to be more engaged as part of a team?
That's a great question, Greg. I think for a leader and or a college kid, just getting into the workforce, being the best listener in the room is always, in my opinion, the best skill set you can have. So, speaking less often and listening, and especially in a team environment, I think there's a lot of pressure on people, leaders, but even individuals to know everything. And I'm a big proponent of vulnerability. So understanding what you know and what you don't know, and letting the people that you've decided to surround yourself with help you. There's a reason it's called a team. It's not because you bring 6 people around you and, me or you, Greg, make all the decisions and we know everything that's right. We listen. We take that in. We go around the room. We don't imprint our opinions onto our team members. And you're open-minded about it. And that would be my biggest piece of advice, is that too often we talk more than we listen.
Okay. That's really key. Is you talked about the vulnerability piece of that and letting yourself know, because today technology in particular is driving things to the point that it's changing so fast that people cannot keep on top of just about everything.
Right.
Yeah. It's been absolutely fascinating. We've been going at this now for about 37 minutes, and it's just the concepts are there. There's a lot of great ideas. I love your onboarding processes for the teams. Okay, getting people, the individuals involved there. So I want to make sure people go back and listen to this. In closing, what's something you would recommend to an organization today to really get them to really start to embrace the culture? I mean, we've talked about communications being the core thing. Beyond that, is there something else you would give advice to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think no matter if you are on the accounting side, the HR side, in a leadership role, even in, a specific role where maybe you're a 1 or 2 man, show, investing in yourself and investing into your teams will always bring an ROI and or profits down the road for you. So, it's tougher now. I think in, a down economy or a potentially down economy, we start cutting things here and there. We've seen it, unfortunately, across some of the big tech industry right now, but investing in your people is always going to come back and pay dividends. And investing in yourself, by the way. So if you're even a 1-man shop out there, or if you're an employee that's looking to move up the ladder or maybe make a change in your career, investing in yourself is never a bad idea, because, and Warren Buffett says this, you can't take that away. Nobody can take that away from you. They can take
give you the lobotomy for that,
but they cannot take away the investment in yourself. Right. So,
and that's so key, because I think that's getting to be more prevalent in today's workforce. 10, 12 years ago, companies should pay for it. No, invest in who you are. Do you believe in you? Okay, because if you're waiting somebody else to do it, and you got to believe in yourself.
Yeah. So absolutely. And another quick idea for anybody in a leadership role out there is kind of have a little bit of both, right? What we do at WinBig is I look for a small investment from my team member to help me understand that that's important to them, and then I'll take care of the rest, right? So I think that's a really good engagement tool to make sure that you're not just investing in it all, but that it matters to your team member and they're willing to come in a little bit with you as well.
Awesome. Appreciate your time. It's been absolutely fascinating here. Folks, it's Win Big Media. And so when you stop to think about it, look at their site, figure their things out. If people want to reach out to you, Brandon, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, I'm an open book in terms of email, so you don't have to go through a form or anything like that. Just shoot me an email at brandon@winbigmedia.com, and I'll get back to you quickly. So,
all right. We really appreciate your time today. Folks, he's given us ideas today all across the board, from the CEO down to the employee, working what they can do to be a better team member, to be a better leader, and which all that's going to drive the culture. Once a week with the Teamwork Advantage, you get ideas that you can implement immediately. Take these ideas that Brandon has shared with us today and help your teams increase their teamwork, their leadership, and their overall culture. Until next week, remember, having a good day is just being average. Listening to this podcast, picking up the ideas from all of these folks, we know you're not average. Go make today an excellent and exceptional day. Until next week, take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Teamwork Advantage with Greg Gregory. Be sure to like, subscribe, and activate the bell icon to be notified of future episodes. To learn more about how Greg can help your organization develop a powerful winning culture, visit TeamsRock.com. That's TeamsRock.com.